Whether it's a business pitch, a wedding toast, or even a public speaking competition, 3-minute speeches can be tricky to craft because they're long enough for us to have some juicy content in them, but they're not so long that we can actually do justice to all that content. So how do we tackle this issue and go about crafting a compelling 3-minute speech? Let's break it down into 3 very simple parts. You have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion, part of almost any speech of any length. In a 3-minute speech, the introduction should take about 30 seconds. The body should take about 2 minutes, and the remaining 30 seconds go into the conclusion. But before we get into all of that, we need to understand why a lot of short speeches, whether they're 3, 5, or even 1 minute long, tend to fall apart. And it's many times because the speaker is confusing the audience with too many messages. So before we sit down to actually write our speech, it's important for us to take a step back and ask ourselves 2 very important things. Number 1, what is our main center idea? What is that one thing that we want to communicate to the audience? Just one, because anything more than that tends to be too much for a 3-minute speech. And secondly, what is the takeaway for the audience? Do we want them to take some sort of action? Do we want them to adopt an idea? What do we want them to do at the end of the speech? Once we have both these things in place, crafting the rest of the speech will become a lot easier. Okay, so getting back to our structure, let's start with the introduction. We can break this down into 2 parts. If you're giving a speech for entertainment or for competition purposes, then the introduction needs to be captivating. It needs to hook our audience from the very beginning. If you want to be outlandish, we can also use some sort of unusual prop to capture their attention from the very beginning. Look how this speaker, Darren Tay, does it when he delivers his presentation. Or if we don't want to use something like a prop, we can also use the imagination scenario. This simply means making the audience shut their eyes and making them imagine something. Check out this example by Rick Elias in his TED Talk.
So imagine a big explosion as you climb through 3,000 feet. Imagine a plane full of smoke. Imagine an engine going clack, 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 clack. Sounds scary. Well, I had a unique seat that day. I was sitting in 1D.
And now if you're giving a more formal 3-minute speech or presentation, we don't necessarily need to have some sort of a hook. We can simply start off with telling the audience why we're here by getting straight to the point and telling them why is it important that they need to listen to this topic. By simply starting off with, I'm here to talk to you about whatever your topic is, and this is important for you, whatever the reason is. That's good enough for a short speech in formal settings. Next comes the body. The main part of your speech, we're going to be spending approximately 2 minutes. The best way to communicate a large chunk of your speech, even if it's just 2 minutes, is to convey it in the form of a story. Now, a lot of us know the importance of storytelling, but sometimes we may find it difficult to take a bunch of information and convert it into a narrative. So I'm not going to get too deeply into this topic because we've made a lot of videos around storytelling. They'll all be linked in the description. But to give you a small gist of it, almost every story will be broken up into 4 parts. You have the desire, the conflict, the solution, and finally, the climax. For example, if you're pitching a particular company or idea, the desire would be, what is the vision for that particular company? The conflict will be, what is the problem or challenge that we're solving for our end customer? The solution will be how the product or service works that will help solve that particular challenge. And finally, the climax will be the way forward in terms of the plan that will help them achieve the overall desire or vision of the company. We have a lot more examples in the other videos, so if you're interested to go deeper into this topic, check them out. And finally, we have the conclusion. This is the remaining 30 seconds of your speech. Over here, we don't want to get too fancy. We simply need to have our main takeaway put at the end of the speech. What is the final action we want the audience to take, or the final idea we want them to adopt? And that should be the closing statement. This is because the end is what the audience tends to remember the most. So it just makes sense to have the most important part of our speech as one of the last lines. An alternative to this is if your speech is very information heavy, you can summarize it towards the end to make sure that the audience don't miss out on anything important. Now, your speech might not exactly be 3 minutes long. It might be 2 minutes or 5 minutes long. There are different nuances that go even when we're playing around with such less minutes. But we've made videos on topics with specific speech lengths. I highly recommend you check out our 2-minute and our 5-minute video in case you have those particular lengths of speeches to give as well.